The handcuffs were tighter than they needed to be. David noticed but didn't complain. He sat in the back of the patrol car, watching the familiar streets of his neighborhood pass by through the window. Streets where he'd built his business from nothing. Streets where people knew his name and trusted him. Now those same people would see him on the news. Arrested, accused of stealing millions. The two officers in the front seat were celebrating. David could hear it in their voices. They thought they'd caught a big fish. A corporate criminal who'd been living the good life while regular people lost their savings. One of them was already talking about the promotion this might bring. David took a slow breath through his nose. In, hold out, a technique he'd learned a long time ago, in a place far worse than the back of a police car. His phone had been buzzing non-stop before they took it. His lawyer, probably. His business partner, definitely. His wife, certainly panicking by now. But David felt something strange, something the officers wouldn't understand even if he tried to explain it. He felt calm. Not the fake kind of calm where you're screaming inside, but putting on a brave face. Real calm. The kind that settles in your bones when you've survived things that actually tried to kill you. The charges were serious. Fraud, embezzlement, wire transfer violations. Words that could mean 20 years in federal prison. His lawyer had warned him this might happen, but David hadn't believed it. He'd done nothing wrong. Surely the truth would come out. But sitting in that car watching the city lights blur into streams of yellow and red, David realized something. The truth didn't always matter. Not right away. Sometimes you had to wait for it. Sometimes you had to survive until it caught up. The station was busy when they arrived. Friday night meant drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and petty criminals all getting processed at once. David was led through a side entrance away from the chaos. White-collar crime got special treatment, apparently. They removed his watch first, a gift from his wife on their 10th anniversary, then his belt, his wallet, his wedding ring, each item placed in a plastic bag and labeled. David watched his life get cataloged like evidence at a crime scene. The booking officer was professional but cold. Fingerprints, photos, front view, side view. David stared at the camera with the same expression he'd worn his whole life when facing difficult things. Steady, unbothered, present but not really there. "You're taking this pretty well," the officer said, almost suspicious. Most people broke down at this point, especially first-timers, especially people who'd never imagined themselves on this side of the law. David just nodded. What was he supposed to say? That he'd seen worse? That he'd been in situations where the people holding him weren't bound by laws or procedures? That he'd once gone 3 days without food or water, not knowing if he'd see another sunrise? They wouldn't believe him. Looking at him now, in his button-down shirt and dress pants, they saw a businessman, maybe a criminal. Definitely someone who'd lived a comfortable life. They had no idea. The holding cell was exactly what he expected. Concrete walls, metal bench, a toilet with no privacy, the smell of disinfectant trying and failing to cover up decades of human misery. 3 other men were already in there. One was pacing like a caged animal. Another sat with his head in his hands, muttering to himself. The third was asleep or pretending to be. David chose a spot on the bench and sat down. He didn't make eye contact. Didn't try to start a conversation. Just sat there breathing steadily, watching the minutes tick by on the clock outside the cell. Hours passed. The other men came and went, replaced by new faces with new problems. Some were angry, shouting at the guards. Some were scared, crying quietly. Some were defiant, promising lawyers and lawsuits and revenge. David just waited. Around midnight, his lawyer finally showed up. Richard looked exactly like you'd expect a defense attorney to look at midnight. Tired, worried, already planning his strategy. "David, what happened? I got the call and came straight here. This is bad. Really bad. They're saying you authorized fraudulent transfers worth $8 million. $8 million. Do you understand what that means?" David looked at his lawyer through the bars. Richard was a good man, smart, experienced, but he was also panicking, and panic never helped anyone. "I didn't do it," David said simply. I know, but they have documents, signatures, transaction records. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look like you." David had already figured that part out. His business partner, probably. The one who'd been acting strange for months. the one who'd suddenly suggested David take a bigger role in approving transfers. Setting him up piece by piece. How long until bail hearing? David asked. Monday morning. You'll have to spend the weekend here. County jail. I tried to expedite it, but the judge is out of town and it's fine. Richard stopped mid-sentence. It's fine? David, you're going to county jail. Do you understand what that means? It's not like I understand. And he did, better than Richard could imagine. David had been in worse places. Much worse. Places where the guards didn't follow rules, where there was no bail hearing coming, where each day was a question mark. After Richard left, promising to bring fresh clothes and start building a defense, David was transferred. The county jail was 20 minutes away, a sprawling complex that looked more like a factory than a place where humans lived. The intake process started all over again. Strip search this time. Orange jumpsuit, plastic sandals, a bedroll that felt like cardboard wrapped in fabric. They assigned him to a unit. Cell block D, cell 47. He'd share it with someone, the guard told him. Rules were simple. Stay quiet. Follow orders. Don't cause problems. David carried his bedroll down the long corridor. Metal doors on both sides, each one holding 2 men. The noise was incredible. Shouts, laughter, arguments, music playing from somewhere. The sound of hundreds of men trying to maintain their humanity in a place designed to strip it away. Cell 47 was near the end. His cellmate was already there, a younger guy covered in tattoos reading a worn paperback. Top or bottom? The guy asked, not looking up. Top's fine, David replied. He climbed onto the upper bunk and lay down, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, someone was crying. Someone else was singing. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, never quite bright enough to read by, never quite dark enough to sleep. David closed his eyes and took another slow breath. He'd survived worse, much worse. And if he could survive that, he could survive this. David didn't sleep much that first night. Not because he was scared. Not because the bunk was uncomfortable or the noise was too loud. He didn't sleep because his mind kept traveling back to a time when survival meant something completely different. He was 7 years old the first time he truly understood fear. Real fear. Not the kind kids feel about monsters under the bed or getting in trouble at school. The kind that makes your hands shake and your stomach turn to ice. His village had been quiet that morning. Too quiet. His mother noticed first. She grabbed him and his little sister and ran. Just ran, no explanation. No time to pack. They left everything behind. That was the day the soldiers came. David's family joined a river of people, all moving in the same direction. Away. That's all anyone knew. Get away, walk, don't stop. His father carried his sister on his shoulders. His mother held David's hand so tight it hurt. They walked for days. Then weeks. Through jungle so thick you couldn't see the sky. Through rivers that came up to David's chest. Through rain that never seemed to stop. His shoes fell apart after the first week. His feet bled. Everyone's feet bled. People died on that walk. David saw them. Old people who couldn't keep up. Sick people with no medicine. Babies who cried themselves silent. His mother would cover his eyes when they passed the bodies, but he'd already seen them. The refugee camp sat on the border, a sea of blue tarps and mud. Thousands of people packed into a space meant for hundreds. The United Nations ran it, but there was never enough of anything. Food, water, medicine, hope. David's family got a spot in the corner of a large tent they shared with 6 other families. No walls, no privacy. Just a piece of ground that was theirs. His sister got sick 2 months later. Fever, diarrhea, simple things that doctors could fix. But there were no doctors, no medicine. Just a line of sick people waiting for a nurse who had nothing to give them. David held his sister's hand the night she died. She was 5 years old. She asked for water, but they'd already used their ration for the day. She died thirsty. His father never recovered. Not really. He stopped talking much. Stopped eating much. Just sat and stared at nothing for hours. David watched his dad disappear even though his body was still there. So David learned to be the one who survived. He was 8 years old and he learned to fight bigger kids for extra food rations. He learned to trade things, to fix things, to make himself useful so the adults would help his family. He learned to wake up every morning even when everything felt hopeless. Because giving up wasn't an option, not when his mother needed him. Not when they'd come so far, 3 years in that camp. 3 years of waiting, of hoping some country would take them. of watching people give up and die even though they were safe from the soldiers now. Finally, America said yes. A church in California sponsored them. David was 10 years old when he stepped off the plane into a world he didn't understand. Everything was different. The language, the food, the way people dressed and talked and laughed. David started school not knowing a single word of English. Kids made fun of his accent, his clothes, the lunch his mother packed that smelled different from everyone else's. But David had survived a jungle. He'd survived a refugee camp. He could survive middle school. He taught himself English by watching television and reading every book he could find. He stayed up late doing homework after working at his uncle's restaurant. Money was tight, always tight. His father couldn't work, couldn't adapt, just sat and stared like he still did in the camp. By 12, David was working every day after school, washing dishes, bussing tables, lying about his age because they needed the money. His mother cleaned houses during the day. Together, they kept the family afloat while his father slowly drowned in memories. High school was better. David made friends, learned to fit in, but he never forgot where he came from, never forgot what real struggle looked like. When his classmates complained about not getting a car for their birthday, David thought about the kids who died on the walk to the border. He got a scholarship to college. Full ride. His mother cried when he told her. First person in the family to go to university. He studied business and computer science, working night shifts to send money home. His father died during David's sophomore year. Liver failure. The doctors said it was medical, but David knew the truth. His father had died years ago in that camp. His body just took a while to catch up. At the funeral, David promised himself something. He'd build a life. A real life. He'd make enough money that his kids would never know hunger. He'd create stability, safety, everything his family had lost. And he did. Started a small tech company after graduation, built it slowly, made smart decisions, treated people fairly. 10 years later, the company had 40 employees and steady profits. Nothing huge but solid, real. He married Lisa, a teacher he met at a coffee shop. They bought a house, had 2 kids. David coached his son's soccer team, went to his daughter's dance recitals. Normal things. Beautiful, boring, normal things. He thought he'd left the past behind, thought those survival skills were tucked away, no longer needed. He was an American businessman now, successful, stable, safe. Then came the arrest, and suddenly, lying on that bunk in county jail, David realized something. He hadn't left those skills behind. They'd been there all along, just waiting, sleeping. The part of him that survived the jungle. The part that survived the camp. The part that learned to endure when enduring seemed impossible. That's why he was calm when the officers arrested him. Why he didn't panic in the holding cell. Why he could lie on this bunk and breathe steady while other men around him fell apart. He'd been broken before, truly broken. Watched his sister die. Watched his father give up. Walked through hell when he was just a child. Prison was terrible, unjust, frustrating, but it wasn't the jungle. Nobody here was dying of dysentery. There was food every day, even if it was bad. There was water, even if it was warm. There were rules, even if they were harsh. David closed his eyes and let the noise of the cell block wash over him. Men shouting. Metal doors clanging. The constant hum of too many humans in too small a space. He'd survived worse, and that meant he could survive this. The question wasn't if he'd make it through. The question was who he'd be when he came out the other side. Because David had learned something important in that camp all those years ago. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about staying human, about keeping the part of yourself that mattered even when everything tried to take it away. He'd done it before. He could do it again. The first week in county jail was designed to break you. David figured that out pretty quickly. Everything about it was calculated to make you feel powerless, small, less than human. The lights never fully went off, just dimmed enough that you couldn't read but not enough to actually sleep. The temperature was always wrong. Too hot or too cold, never comfortable. The food came at random times, barely enough to fill your stomach, and the noise. God, the noise never stopped. David watched the other new inmates struggle with it. There was a guy 2 cells down who screamed at the guards every morning. Another one who cried himself to sleep every night. A businessman type like David, who kept insisting there'd been a mistake and demanding to see a supervisor. That guy lasted 3 days before he tried to hurt himself. They moved him to medical after that. David understood their panic. He really did. For most of these men, this was the worst thing that had ever happened to them. Their entire world had collapsed. Everything they knew was gone, but David had been here before. Not in prison, but in this feeling. This place where control slips away and all you have left is yourself. So he created a routine, small things, things that were his. Every morning before the wake-up bell, David would get up, do push-ups on the cold concrete floor, 50 of them, then sit-ups, then stretches, movements he'd taught himself as a teenager when he had nothing but his own body to work with. His cellmate, a guy named Antonio, watched him the first few mornings without saying anything. On the 4th day, Antonio finally spoke. "You military or something?" "No," David said. "Just used to waking up early." Antonio was in for drug possession. 3rd strike. He was looking at serious time. He talked a lot at night when the fear got too heavy. About his kids, his ex-wife, the choices that led him here. David listened. That was another thing he'd learned young. Sometimes people just needed someone to hear them. "You're different, man," Antonio said one night. "Everyone else in here is either angry or scared out of their minds. You're just, I don't know, calm." David thought about how to answer that. "I've been in bad situations before," he finally said. "This isn't the worst one." Antonio laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Worse than jail? What could be worse than this?" David didn't answer. Some stories weren't for sharing. By the 2nd week, other inmates started noticing David too. There was something about the way he moved through the chaos without being part of it, like he had a force field of quiet around him. A fight broke out in the common area during rec time, 2 guys going at it over something stupid. A card game, maybe. Or someone looking at someone wrong. Didn't really matter. In here, everything was a reason to fight. The guards broke it up, but the tension stayed thick in the air. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the next explosion. David sat at a table in the corner, eyes closed, breathing slowly. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. A technique a teacher had shown him years ago. A monk who'd survived the same refugee camp who'd taught David that the mind could be still even when the world wasn't. "What are you doing?" A younger guy sat down across from him. Couldn't be more than 22. Scared eyes trying to look tough. "Breathing," David said. "I can see that. But what are you actually doing?" David opened his eyes. The kid reminded him of himself at that age. Trying to be strong when everything felt like it was falling apart. "You want to learn?" The kid shrugged, trying to act like he didn't care. But he stayed sitting, David showed him. Simple breathing. Nothing fancy. Just a way to slow down the panic that lived in all of them. The kid tried it, awkward at first, then settling into it. "That's kinda cool," the kid admitted after a few minutes. "I feel I don't know, less crazy." Word spread in that weird way it does in jail. By the 3rd week, David had a small group of guys who'd sit with him during rec time. Not doing much. Just breathing, being quiet, finding small moments of peace in a place designed to destroy it. The guards noticed. One of them, Officer Williams, pulled David aside one day. "You causing trouble?" Williams asked, but his tone wasn't aggressive. More curious, "No, sir. Just trying to do my time quietly." Williams studied him. "You're different from most guys we get in here. What's your story?" David gave him the simple version. "The arrest, the charges, the lawyer working on his case. You think you'll beat it?" Williams asked. "Eventually," David said. "Truth has a way of coming out." "Maybe," Williams said. "But that could take months, years even." "You prepared for that?" David thought about the jungle, the camp, the 3 years of waiting with no guarantee of rescue. "I've waited before," he said. Williams nodded slowly, like he understood something without David having to explain it. "Keep doing what you're doing. You're keeping things calm in here. That's rare. Valuable even." After that, Williams would sometimes ask David to talk to inmates who were spiraling, guys who were about to do something stupid. David would sit with them. Listen, share what little wisdom he had. He told them about small victories, about how getting through one day was enough, about how giving up felt easy but regret lasted forever. He didn't preach, didn't pretend to have all the answers, just talked like one human to another. Not everyone listened. Some guys were too far gone in their anger or fear, but some did. And those small moments mattered. Antonio started doing the morning exercises with David. Then 2 other guys joined. then 3 more. By week 5, there was a small group of them, working out together before the sun came up. Not talking much, just being present, moving their bodies, proving to themselves they still had some control. David's lawyer visited twice a week with updates. The case was complicated. His business partner had disappeared. The evidence was messy. It would take time to sort out. "How are you holding up?" Richard always asked, expecting David to be falling apart by now. "I'm okay," David would say, and he meant it. At night, when Antonio was asleep and the cell block finally quieted to a dull roar, David would lie on his bunk and think about his family. His wife visiting once a week, trying to be strong for him. His kids asking when Daddy was coming home. Those thoughts hurt more than anything else in this place. The knowledge that his family was suffering because of something he didn't do. That his kids would remember this. That his life's work was crumbling. But even that pain was familiar. He'd lost things before. Important things. People he loved. And he'd survived it. Not unchanged, but survived. This place was hard. Unfair. Dehumanizing. But David had been in worse. And the part of him that survived the jungle, that survived the camp, that built a life from nothing, that part was still there. Still strong, still refusing to break. Some of the guys started calling him Pops even though he was only 43. It was a term of respect, the calm one, the steady one, the guy who'd figured out how to be human in a place that tried to make you an animal. David didn't feel wise. Didn't feel special. He just felt like someone who'd learned the hard way that survival was a choice you made every single day. And he kept choosing it. 8 months in, David got called to a meeting with his lawyer. These meetings usually brought small updates. A delay here, a new court date there. The legal system moved like molasses, and David had made peace with that. But Richard looked different today. Excited, nervous, like he was holding something big. "We found something," Richard said, pulling out a folder thick with papers. "Actually, we found a lot of somethings." David sat forward, keeping his expression neutral. Hope was dangerous in here. He'd learned not to let it in too easily. "There's a forensic accountant on our team now, Jennifer. She's brilliant. Spent 3 months going through every transaction, every email, every piece of paper your company ever touched." Richard spread documents across the table between them. "Your business partner, Kevin. He's been embezzling for almost 2 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger, then huge. And he's been setting you up the entire time to take the fall." David stared at the papers. Numbers, dates, email chains. Slowly, a picture formed. Kevin had been clever. Every fraudulent transaction had David's signature. Except they weren't real signatures. Digital copies manipulated and pasted. The kind of thing that looked real unless you knew exactly what to look for. Jennifer found inconsistencies in the metadata. Richard continued. Timestamps that don't match. Files that were created on your computer when you weren't even in the office. Security logs showing you were in meetings while these transactions were supposedly being made. David felt something shift in his chest. Not quite relief, not yet, but something close. "There's more," Richard said. 3 employees came forward. They were scared before, but now they're willing to testify. They saw Kevin working late nights alone, accessing your computer. They thought it was weird but didn't want to say anything. "Where is Kevin now?" David asked. Richard's expression darkened. "Gone, disappeared about 6 months ago. Right before the investigation really heated up. His passport was flagged at LAX heading to Singapore. He's probably somewhere with no extradition treaty, living off the money he stole." David sat back, processing. All these months, all this time in here. And the person who actually did it was living free somewhere tropical, probably sipping drinks by a pool. He waited for the anger to come, the rage at the injustice of it. But it didn't. Or maybe it did, and he'd just gotten so good at managing it that he couldn't feel it anymore. "So what happens now?" David asked. "We present all this to the prosecutor. With this evidence, they'll have to drop the charges. You could be out in weeks, maybe days if the judge expedites it." Weeks, maybe days. David had been in here for 8 months. 243 days, to be exact. He'd counted every single one, and now it might be ending. "There's something else," Richard said, his voice getting quieter. "You could sue. Wrongful imprisonment. The company, the city. We're looking at millions in damages. Real money. Life-changing money. David thought about that. Money couldn't give him back the time he'd lost with his kids, couldn't erase the shame his family had endured, couldn't undo the damage to his reputation, but it could help. Could rebuild what Kevin had destroyed. Could provide security. "Let me think about it," David said. After Richard left, David walked back to his cell in a daze. Antonio was there reading a magazine. "Good news?" Antonio asked, reading David's face. "Maybe. Lawyer thinks I'll be getting out soon." Antonio's expression shifted.
Happy for David, but also sad.
"Losing one of the few people in here who made things bearable? That's great, man. Really. You never belonged in here anyway." David sat on his bunk. "None of us do." That night, David couldn't sleep. Not from excitement, not from joy. From something heavier. He'd spent 8 months in here learning to survive this place. Learning to be calm. Learning to help other guys find their own calm. And now he was leaving. But Antonio wasn't leaving. The kid he'd taught breathing exercises to wasn't leaving. Officer Williams would still be here, trying to keep peace in a place designed for chaos. David thought about his father. How he'd survived the camp but never really left it. How he'd carried that weight until it crushed him. David had promised himself he wouldn't be like that. Wouldn't let trauma define him. But he also didn't want to just forget. Didn't want to walk out of here and pretend these months never happened. The next morning during exercise, David told the small group that had formed around him. "I'm probably getting out soon," he said simply. The reactions were mixed. Congratulations. Handshakes. But also quiet disappointment. The group would lose its center. A guy named Raymond spoke up. He was older in for white-collar crime like David. Smart guy who'd made one bad choice that spiraled. "What are you going to do when you get out?" David had been thinking about that all night. "Honestly, I don't know yet. Figure out my business. Spend time with my family. Try to rebuild." "You should do something with what you learned in here," Raymond said. "Not everyone figures out how to survive this place without losing themselves." "You did, that's worth something." David nodded slowly. Raymond was right. These 8 months had taught him things. About resilience, about helping others, about the kind of support people needed when everything fell apart. 2 weeks later, Richard came back with official news. The prosecutor was dropping all charges. The evidence was overwhelming. David was a free man. The court date was set. Tuesday morning. 2 days away. David should have been celebrating. Should have been counting down the hours. Instead, he felt strange. Disconnected. He spent his last weekend in jail the same way he'd spent the previous months. Morning exercises. Breathing sessions during rec time. Listening to guys talk about their fears and regrets. On Monday night, Antonio asked him the question that had been hanging between them. "You going to remember us?" David looked at his cellmate. 8 months of sharing a tiny cell. Of listening to each other breathe in the dark. Of becoming friends in a place where friendship was hard? "Yeah," David said. "I'm going to remember. What are you going to do out there?" David had been thinking about that. About Raymond's words. About all the guys in here who weren't bad people, just broken ones. People who'd made mistakes or gotten caught in bad situations. People who needed someone to believe they could be more than their worst moment. "I think I'm going to try to help," David said. "Don't know how yet. But something," Antonio nodded. "Good. World needs more people who actually help instead of just talking about it." Tuesday morning came early. David did his 50 push-ups one last time in that cell, said goodbye to Antonio, who pretended it wasn't hitting him hard. The walk to the processing area felt longer than it should, passing cells where he'd sat with guys during their worst moments, passing the common area where he'd taught breathing exercises, passing Officer Williams, who nodded with respect. "Good luck out there," Williams said. "Don't come back," David smiled. That's the plan. They gave him back his belongings. The watch, the belt, the wedding ring. Pieces of his old life that felt strange on his body now. The courtroom was packed. His wife Lisa was there crying before he even walked in. His kids. His mother, who'd survived so much herself and now watched her son walk free. The judge was brief. Charges dismissed. Case closed. David was free to go. Walking out of that courthouse into the sunshine, David felt something he hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not for the arrest. Not for the injustice, but for what he'd learned about himself. About his strength. About the part of him that had survived the jungle and the camp and now this. He'd been tested again and he'd passed. Lisa hugged him tight, and David let himself feel it. The relief, the joy, the weight lifting. But even as he held his family, part of his mind was still in that cell block. Still with Antonio and Raymond and the kid and all the others, still thinking about what came next. The first week of freedom was harder than David expected. Everyone thought he'd be celebrating. Thrilled to be home, grateful for every small thing, and he was grateful. He really was. But freedom felt strange after 8 months of routine, of rules, of knowing exactly where you could go and when. His house felt too big, too quiet. He'd wake up at 5 in the morning out of habit, ready for push-ups on a concrete floor, and remember he didn't have to do that anymore. His kids were different too. Not in bad ways, just different. 8 months was a long time in a child's life. His daughter had grown 2 inches. His son had a new favorite video game David knew nothing about. They were careful around him at first. Like he was fragile. Like he might break if they said the wrong thing. "I'm okay," he kept telling Lisa. Really, I'm fine, but she knew him too well. Knew that fine was what he said when he was holding something heavy inside. "You don't have to be okay right away," she said one night. "You went through something terrible. It's okay to not be okay." David nodded but didn't say what he was really thinking. That he'd been through worse and come out fine. That this should be easy compared to that. That he should just be able to snap back to normal life. Except he couldn't. And he didn't know why. Richard called 2 weeks after the release. "We need to talk about the lawsuit. Wrongful imprisonment. I've got firms interested. We're talking serious money, David, 7 figures, maybe 8. David met him at a coffee shop downtown. The same one where he used to meet clients back when his business was thriving. "Back when life made sense, I've been thinking," David said. "I don't want to sue." Richard nearly dropped his coffee. "What? David, you have every right to sue. What they did to you was wrong. You lost 8 months of your life. Your business nearly collapsed. Your family suffered. You deserve compensation." "I know I have the right," David said, "but I don't think it's what I need." Richard leaned back, studying him. "Then what do you need?" That was the question, wasn't it? David had been asking himself the same thing for 2 weeks. "I need to do something that matters," he finally said. Over the next month, David started visiting his old company. Most of the employees were still there, though nervous. They didn't know if he blamed them for not seeing what Kevin was doing, for not speaking up sooner. David didn't blame them. He knew how fear worked, how it made people stay quiet even when they saw wrong things happening. He sold the company, not for much but enough, used some of the money to pay off debts, put some away for his kids' college, and started thinking about what came next. Lisa found him in his home office one night, surrounded by papers and notes. "What are you working on?" she asked. "An idea," David said. "Maybe a crazy one." He told her about the guys in jail, about Antonio and Raymond and the kid, about how many of them weren't bad people, just lost ones, people who'd made mistakes and had no idea how to rebuild after paying for those mistakes. "I want to start something," David said. "A program to help guys coming out of jail find work, get training, learn skills, but also the other stuff, the mental stuff, how to handle stress, how to cope, how to not fall back into old patterns." Lisa sat down, listening carefully. "The system doesn't prepare people for getting out," David continued. "It just locks them up and then opens the door one day and says good luck. Most guys don't know how to fill out a job application, don't have references, don't have anyone who believes in them." "And you want to be that person who believes in them," Lisa said. "I want to try." She was quiet for a moment. "This is because of what you went through. In the camp and in jail," David nodded. "I survived both because I learned how to adapt, how to stay calm, how to keep going even when everything felt hopeless. Not everyone learns that, and I think I can teach it." "You know this will be hard," Lisa said. "These are people with serious problems, trauma, addiction, criminal records. It's not going to be simple." "Nothing worth doing is simple," David said. 3 months later, Second Chance Training opened in a small office near downtown. David kept the name simple, direct. That's what the program was about, giving people a second chance. The first class had 8 men, all recently released from county jail, all struggling to find work, all carrying the weight of their past. David stood in front of them that first day, looking at faces he recognized. The fear, the shame, the desperate hope that maybe this time things would be different. I'm not going to tell you this is easy, David started. I'm not going to promise you'll have a perfect life if you complete this program. What I will tell you is that change is possible. Growth is possible, and you're not alone in figuring it out. He told them a little about himself, not the refugee story, not yet, just that he'd been in county jail, that he understood what it felt like to have your world collapse. The men relaxed a little. Here was someone who actually understood, not some social worker reading from a manual. Someone who'd been there. The program was practical. Job skills, resume writing, interview practice. But David also included the things he'd learned: breathing exercises, stress management, how to handle the panic that came with trying to rebuild your life. Antonio was released 4 months after David. He showed up at the office one afternoon, looking lost. Heard you were doing something, Antonio said. Thought I'd check it out. David hired him on the spot, not as a student, but as a mentor. Someone else who understood what these guys were going through. You think we can actually help them? Antonio asked after that first week. Some of them, David said honestly. Not all. Some guys aren't ready yet. Some will mess up again. But if we help even a few, that's worth it. The program grew slowly. Word spread through the jail system, through halfway houses, through parole officers who were tired of watching guys fall back into the same patterns. David partnered with local businesses willing to give people with records a chance. Trained them on how to support employees with difficult backgrounds. Created a network of employers who believed in second chances. A year in, David got a call from Raymond. He'd been released and found a job through the program's connections. He was doing well, staying clean, rebuilding relationships with his kids. I just wanted to say thank you, Raymond said. You gave me tools I didn't have before. A way to think about things differently. David hung up the phone feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Real purpose. His kids understood it now too. They'd visit the office sometimes, watching their dad work with men who society had written off. Learning that people weren't defined by their worst moments. 2 years after his release, David was invited to speak at a criminal justice reform conference. He almost said no. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But Lisa convinced him. Standing on that stage looking at judges and lawmakers and activists, David told his story. The refugee camp. The survival. The wrongful arrest. The 8 months in jail. The calm he found because he'd survived worse. Prison didn't break me, he said, but it changed me. It reminded me what matters. Not money or status or success. People matter. Helping matters. Giving someone a chance when no one else will, that matters. The audience was silent. I could have sued, David continued. Could have taken millions in compensation. And maybe I deserved it. But I realized something. That money wouldn't change what happened. It wouldn't give me back those 8 months. What would matter is what I did with what I learned. He talked about second chance training, about the men they'd helped, about Antonio, who now ran a whole department, about the businesses that had taken risks on people others wouldn't touch. Everyone wants to talk about criminal justice reform, David said, about changing laws and policies. And that's important. But you know what else is important? Being there when someone walks out of those doors, believing they can be more than their record. Giving them actual tools to build a different life. After the speech, people lined up to talk to him. Organizations wanting to partner. Donors wanting to contribute. Other cities wanting to start similar programs. David listened to all of them, taking notes, making connections. On the drive home, Lisa asked him if he ever regretted it. The arrest. The 8 months. Everything he'd lost. David thought about it carefully. I regret that Kevin got away with it. I regret the pain it caused you and the kids. But the rest of it? I don't know if regret is the right word. What is the right word? Necessary, David said. It was necessary. I needed to remember who I was, what I'd survived, what I was capable of. I'd gotten comfortable, forgotten where I came from. Those 8 months reminded me. He thought about the jungle, the camp, his sister, his father, all the hard things that had shaped him into someone who could survive anything. I stayed calm in prison because I'd survived worse, David said. But now I realize something else. I survived worse so I could help others survive too. That's what it was all for. Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand. David drove through the city he'd rebuilt his life in, past the courthouse where he'd been freed, past the old office where his business used to be, toward the small building where second chance training was changing lives one person at a time. He'd survived the jungle. He'd survived the camp. He'd survived prison. And now, finally, he was doing more than just surviving. He was living with purpose. And that made all the difference.